Prior to doing any coding experiments with the Leap Trainer, I have decided to look into the options available within the tool to see how that they can be varied. I've already looked on the README files, and it tells you what each of the different aspects within the options does. So if you just open up the options here, on the right hand you've got minimum gesture velocity, max pose velocity, minimum gesture frames, minimum pose frames, hit threshold, training gestures, convolution factor, and downtime. So to begin with, if I just start with the minimum gesture velocity at the top. Now what this does is it's the minimum velocity needed for a gesture to start recording. So at the moment it's set at 300, so if I change that to something smaller, like 200, then it should be easier for gestures to start recording. So I just put in wave. So it's already performed a gesture there. You saw it's quite fast in recognising that gesture, which I think could be pretty useful for the sign language. Now also within your options you've got maximum pose velocity. Now this number is only 30 because it's above this number that the recording will stop, so also you don't want much motion for poses. So changing the max pose velocity to a value like 10 should make it a bit harder for it to recognise a pose, because I'll have to keep my hand really still for it to record. Any slight movements and it'll be too much. So if I just try just hand, try moving it a little bit. See, it's not actually recognising that because my hand's moving a little. So if I hand it really still now, there we go. So that makes it really accurate for doing hands positions and just poses. So now if I move on to a different option, if I refresh, there we go. Okay, all the options have gone back to normal. So now if we look at the minimum gesture frames, this is the minimum amount of frames needed for a gesture to be recognised. So at the moment it's set very low at 5. So if I set it instead to, say, I don't know, 30, then it should make it a bit more difficult for the gesture to be recognised, but more accurate at the same time. So let's try, just do wave again. So it's recognised that there. So now if I re-perform that, you can see that it's actually making it more difficult to recognise the gesture because there's more frames needed to line up with my previous one for it to actually work. So refreshing that again. There's also the option in here for the minimum pose frames, but I won't go through that as well. Hit threshold. Now this is quite an important one. It's the strictness of the gesture recognition. So at the moment it's set to 0.65, but if that value were higher, then it will make the recognition of the gestures a lot more strict. So if I try increasing it to something like 0.8, and then I'll just do the hand gesture again, like the pose. So now if I try spreading my fingers out a bit more, so it's managing to match it pretty well at 95%, and that's because the threshold now is making it more accurate to my hand. So I've just refreshed it again. Now I've also got the training gestures, which is at the moment set to 1. Now what this does is it's the number of times you have to do the training gesture before the actual gesture is learned by the tool. So this could be quite useful in trying to improve the overall kind of accuracy of it, the gesture, because once you perform it multiple times, the hand will obviously be in different positions. So if I try maybe I'll do twice to start with. So now if I go and I'll do the hand pose again. So that's it performed once, and then it's performed it twice. So we're just to match those two performances together to provide a more average position of the fingers and the thumb and the hand in general. And the next factor is convolution factor. Now what this does is it's the factor by which Gaussian distribution will occur when and this will help broaden training data. I'm not sure if I'll use this in mine because I think it might make it a bit too difficult to recognise the complexity of the signs. But if I give it a go anyway and put in a factor of say 10 and just see what that does. So if I perform hand, actually no, I'll do a gesture for this one. So now performing that wave gesture again, you can see it's getting a slight match here, 67%, and that's because the Gaussian blur is just joining the different frames of the hand together to make it a bit more accurate in recognising the gesture. And the final option available, right down at the bottom here, is downtime, and this is the time between which a new gesture can be recognised after one has just been performed. So at the moment it's set to 1000, which is milliseconds, so that's just 1 second. If I set that to something quite large like 5000, so it'll be 5 seconds now. So we try creating a gesture, so just do 2. So it's just learn 2. And now if I try to do another one. It's taken a bit longer there, as you can see, to recognise the next gesture, and this can just be useful in terms of the initial creation of the gestures, so that after you've performed one it won't immediately try and recognise a new gesture, which will complicate matters a little bit. So now that I've kind of experimented with these options, I hope to kind of fine-tune them a little, just so that it works a bit better with my sign language idea.